1. My fishing rod. My name is Jerry Password, a fishing fanatic and transmigrator, aquatic life detective and angler. Muttering nonsense to the riverbank like that was, unsurprisingly, our protagonist, Lynn. It wasn't entirely nonsense. He was, after all, a transmigrator. His transmigration had been anything but subtle. One moment he was in his soft, oversized bed, dreaming of hauling up a 100-meter-long monster fish. The next, a fully loaded dump truck, in a way that made no sense to physics or building codes, had smashed through his bedroom and flattened him and his mattress. Yes, a dump truck. How it had bypassed neighborhood security, navigated corridors, or teleported itself into his room, nobody could explain. The point was, Lynn and his bed were gone. When he opened his eyes again, he was a porcelain-skinned little boy. And like every transmigrator before him, he had been assigned the inevitable feature, the system. The system was straightforward. It issued random tasks with various rewards, and the abilities granted might be directly related to the task or completely unrelated, like opening a blind box. It had also helpfully arranged his identity: deceased parents, a car and a house, and enough savings to last 3 lifetimes. A newbie gift pack read, "Engrave, like a photocopier. You can engrave any book knowledge or skill you see with your own eyes, mastering it instantly, and making it available immediately." Thinking about it, transmigration wasn't so bad. Lynn pulled up his personal panel. Classed. Skills, long enough to need scrolling. Abilities, engrave, like a photocopier. Affinity, your affinity is extraordinary. Hopefully you won't get into manly situations or do anything weird. Lang can speak every language. Besides the mysterious class and the overfull skill list, there wasn't much to note. Lynn figured the class was undecided because he was only 11. The system probably thought he was too young to pick a life path. Affinity was the reward for his first post-transmigration task, keeping a dying tree alive. Language mastery had unlocked when he tried to hold a 10-minute conversation with a local who had a thick accent, and the system stepped in with a task to successfully converse for 10 minutes. It should be here, he thought. A voice broke the river's quiet. An old man in a starry robe that looked ripped from a medieval fairy tale appeared. A small bird perched on his shoulder. The bird looked a little lethargic, but its feathers blazed a remarkable red, as if it had just been reborn. The newcomer was Albus Dumbledore. "Hello!" The greeting startled Lynn, who'd been daydreaming of fighting a giant creature underwater, or rather of being dragged around by one. His hand slipped. The fishing rod flew from his grasp, and with a soft splash was pulled into the river by the fish, vanishing instantly. Lynn stared at his empty hand, still frozen mid-grip, then slowly looked up. Shock, heartbreak, and a sense of doom crossed his face as he saw the cause: the oddly dressed old man. If looks could speak, his would have been extremely rude. "I'm sorry, child. I'll compensate you for your fishing rod," Dumbledore said, eyes apologetic. "But first, I need to show you something." He produced a heavy parchment envelope sealed with wax, the seal bearing a shield surrounded by a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake. Lynn frowned and reached for the letter. The instant his fingers touched the paper, the system chimed inside his head. "Ding! Class activated!" "Ding! Triggered task. Pluck the beard of the old man in front of you, at least 3 hairs. Reward item, undetectable extension trunk. Cannot be opened by others unless the owner allows it." Lynn's eyelids twitched. He forced himself not to act on impulse and opened the letter instead. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Principal, Albus Dumbledore, head of the International Confederation of Wizards, Order of Merlin First Class, Chief Warlock of the Wisengamot. Dear Mr. Lynn, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to study at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Attached was a detailed list of books and equipment: plain work robes, dragonhide gloves, and permitted pets: owl, cat, or toad. There was also the special reminder: first-year students may not bring their own broomsticks. Lynn stared, dazed. A magical world? Hogwarts? Could this be a scam? He opened his system panel. The class entry had changed from a question mark to wizard. This was no prank. Magic existed here. He took a deep breath and couldn't help glancing again at Dumbledore's long, silver-white beard, which looked impressively well cared for. The system task promise of a trunk sounded amazing. He definitely had to complete it. definitely not out of spite for the lost fishing rod. Filled with a mix of excitement and disbelief, his voice trembling, he blurted, Is this real? This is amazing." He strode toward Dumbledore, as if to embrace the kind old man who had brought such news. Dumbledore smiled, assuming the boy was simply overwhelmed. But as Lynn reached him, he perfectly timed a trip over his own feet and lunged forward with a cry. Dumbledore reached instinctively to steady him. Lynn's flailing hands closed on the old man's beard and he yanked downward. "Oh, ouch! Child, gently! Let go!" Dumbledore cried, his glasses askew as he hiccuped from the surprise. Ding! Task completed. Reward, undetectable extension trunk has been issued. The notification chimed, and Lynn immediately let go, his face the picture of panic and apology. I'm sorry, Professor. I was too excited and lost my footing. Are you all right?" He apologized so fast and so earnestly that it was hard to blame him. Dumbledore, rubbing his aching chin and looking bemused, could only smile and forgive the overly eager new student. After all, what was a little beard plucking from a child about to enter the magical world? Having confirmed Lynn's intention to enroll, Dumbledore suggested, "It's still early. If it's convenient, I can take you to Diagon Alley now to buy your school supplies." Lynn's eyes lit up. The reward was secured, and the door to a magical life was opening. He wore an expression of eager anticipation fitting an 11-year-old. "That's great. Let's go, Professor. P.S. Interested friends, remember to add this to your library. 2. Diagon Alley." Before they set off for Diagon Alley, Lynn made a quick trip home. He went straight to his study and pulled a small, plain cloth bag from a drawer. It was stuffed with a thick stack of British pounds, 5,000 of them. Dumbledore had just explained the wizarding world's currency to him: gold galleons, silver sickles, bronze nuts, and an exchange system that made Lynn's head spin. 1 galleon equals 17 sickles, and 1 sickle equals 29 nuts. Who thought that was a good idea? Lynn grumbled inwardly. If you couldn't do mental arithmetic on the spot, you'd be at the goblin's mercy. Dumbledore had also given him an exchange rate, £5 for 1 shiny gold galleon. Lynn did a quick calculation and felt suddenly rich. The rate was practically charitable. His £5,000 would translate into an impressive pile of wizarding money. His savings that wouldn't run out in 3 lifetimes still looked secure. "Are you ready, child?" Dumbledore asked, eyeing the modest cloth sack in Lynn's hand. "I'm ready, Professor." Lynn patted the bag and smiled. To make shopping easier, they traveled by Muggle means. Diagon Alley lay in central London, not far from where they were, so the next scene was delightfully odd. A legendary wizard in star-strewn robes and an 11-year-old boy stood on a London curb and flagged down a black taxi. The driver glanced at Dumbledore, raised an eyebrow, and said nothing. Londoners were used to oddities. Half an hour later, the taxi pulled up in front of a run-down pub. Lynn followed Dumbledore through the leaky cauldron, noticing that the patrons watched the old wizard with a mixture of awe and respect. This man had a reputation. They stepped into the pub's backyard, where Dumbledore came to a particular section of brickwork. "Remember this trash can," he said, tapping one brick 3 times with a long finger. 3 up and 2 across. There it is. At his touch, the brick vibrated as if alive. The wall shifted and folded, bricks sliding aside to form a wide archway. Beyond it was Diagon Alley. Lynn took a breath and stepped through. A narrow, cobbled street wound away between crooked medieval buildings, with owls circling overhead. Windows displayed self-stirring cauldrons, crystal balls pulsing with inner light, and heavy books flipping their own pages. The air smelled of tanned leather, pungent herbs, and a sweet pastry scent that made his stomach rumble. At the end of the street, a towering white building in classical style loomed above everything else: Gringotts Wizarding Bank. They went there first. Inside, a stern warning was engraved on the wall in large letters: thieves would face dire consequences. Under the supervision of a shrewd-eyed goblin, the currency exchange was smooth and efficient. Lynn handed over his £5,000 and received in return a heavy bag of glittering galleons with some sickles and nuts for change. The coins clinked satisfyingly in the bag. Lynn felt an odd, warm sense of security. The shopping trip officially began. Flourish and Blots came first for his first-year textbooks. Then they went to Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions. a bright, tidy shop with bolts of fabric stacked by color. A few other children his age were waiting. After a short time, a kind-faced, plump witch, Madame Malkin herself, came out to help him. A magical measuring tape fluttered toward him and took all the necessary measurements with efficient whirring motions. It even tried to inspect his waist before Lynn flicked it away. He chose the standard Hogwarts plain black robe, and in no time a perfectly fitted set was handed to him. The whole process was astonishingly fast. They moved on to other shops for a cauldron, brass scales, dragonhide gloves, and various other odd and useful items. As they passed Elop's Owl Emporium, Dumbledore offered a friendly reminder. Lynn, owning an owl is very convenient in the wizarding world for sending letters or receiving packages. Lynn went inside. A cacophony of chattering filled his head the moment he stepped in. Pick me, pick me. My feathers are sleek, and I'm the fastest at deliveries. Buzz off, 2 legs, hands off me. I'm hungry. When's dinner? Lynn froze, then blinked. Language mastery. His ability extended to owls too? If he spoke, would they understand him? He hadn't had much practice talking to animals since he got the ability. Besides, he was famously useless at fishing. The fish always got away. He approached a sturdy, tawny owl and said, "Hello." The tawny turned its head, looked him up and down as if he were beneath contempt, and then turned its back on him. Not interested, it seemed. Undeterred, Lynn tried a snowy owl, pure white and striking. This one cocked its head and replied in a rough, unmistakable regional tone, "What do you want?" The accent was so thick and unexpected that Lynn stood for a moment, speechless. Then, before he knew it, he found himself answering in the same dialect without thinking. The owl puffed up, pleased. "Don't know. Ma says our family came from up in the Northeast. You taking me back? Don't expect me to fly for nothing. Gotta be some dried fish." Lynn laughed inwardly. So it wasn't that the birds didn't understand him. It depended on the bird. The tawny had simply been rude. "I'll take this one," he said to the shopkeeper, pointing at the snowy owl. "This one, 5 galleons." Lynn paid without hesitation, picked up the cage, and carried his new companion, whom he promptly named Old 8, out to find Dumbledore, waiting patiently. Dumbledore nodded approvingly at the snowy owl's spirit. With most of the supplies bought, Dumbledore led Lynn toward their last and most important stop, Ollivander's, the wand shop. 3. Ollivander's Wand Shop, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. Lynn followed Dumbledore to the entrance of the legendary shop and then fell silent. The storefront was dilapidated. Dust on the windows looked thick enough to scrape off and build a new shop. The gold letters on the door were flaking. You could barely make out Ollivander. Does the wizarding world really love that vintage feel so much? Lynn thought. Look at Gringotts, another monopoly, but its marble pillars are polished to reflections. The broom shop down the street is bright and tidy. Why does this place look condemned? Dumbledore noticed his undisguised scowl and managed an awkward smile. Mr. Ollivander's craftsmanship is second to none, he said, trying to save the impression. In the end, Lynn's desire for a wand won out over his irritation with the exterior. He pushed open the creaking door. Inside was marginally better than the outside. Mountainous piles of wand boxes were stacked neatly, though dust lay thick on them too. The shop was busy. Lynn and Dumbledore had to wait in a corner. He watched the youngsters ahead pick their wands like a scene from a disaster movie. Either someone's parchment would catch fire in a heap, or a wand would be waved and nothing would happen at all. His eyelids twitched. When the customers ahead left with their wands, a gentle voice seemed to come from the dust itself. Mr. Ollivander, his large pale eyes shining like 2 moons in the dim shop, fixed his gaze on Lynn. "Good afternoon, child," he said. "Are you here alone?" A little puzzled, Lynn answered, "Yes, sir." "No problem, of course. What is your name?" "Lynn." Ollivander nodded, guessing he was a muggle born with a foreign-sounding name. "Which hand do you use?" That struck Lynn as odd. "Either hand is fine," he said. The faint smile at the corner of Ollivander's mouth froze. "You must choose one." "Right hand, then," Lynn said. And the moment he spoke, a magical tape measure flew out and began taking his arm length, height, even the distance from shoulder to the tip of his middle finger. He was relieved it didn't try anything more intrusive. After the measurements, Ollivander melted into the maze of shelves, muttering to himself, and returned with a long box. "Try this." Vinewood, dragon heartstring core, 13.5 inches, reasonably springy. Lynn held the wand. A warm sensation spread through his hand. He gave it a cautious wave, and the tip lit with a steady, soft glow. Interesting. He liked the feeling, but Ollivander frowned and shook his head. No, no, not this one. The light is bright, but it's too submissive. It hasn't found its master. It's more like a polite response. He snatched the wand away and produced another. Ash wood, phoenix feather, 12.3 inches, very resilient. Lynn waved it. Another glow appeared, brighter than the first. Ollivander frowned harder. Walnut, unicorn hair, 11 inches, glow. Applewood, dragon heartstring, 14 inches, glow. Holly, phoenix feather, 13 inches, glow again. No explosion, no rejection, just polite responses. No earth-shattering resonance, nothing that proved the wand had chosen its wizard. No matter the wood or core, a light would bloom in his hand, and that was that. The more Ollivander tried, the more unsettled he became. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He muttered and stared at Lynn with a baffled expression. Strange, so strange. I have never seen such a child, he kept whispering. He looked at Lynn, bored, almost indifferent, then at the growing line outside the shop, and let out a long, hopeless sigh. The old man's confidence in his craft seemed shaken to the roots. At last, exhausted, he waved vaguely toward the shelves. You, go pick one that looks good to you. He seemed spent as he said it and leaned against the counter, murmuring to himself with empty eyes. The wand chooses the wizard. The Ollivander family motto. This must be an accident. Yes, an accident. Lynn blinked. He didn't understand why the old man was so devastated, but he did as he was told and wandered among the dusty boxes. His eye settled on a wand tucked in a corner. The wood wasn't rare, but the shape was smooth and elegant. The grain glowed warmly in the dim light. He liked it at once. I'll take this one, he said, picking it up. Ollivander glanced and recited the details on autopilot. Laurel, dragon heartstring, 13.5 inches. That will be 7 galleons. The way he said the price sounded as if he had used his last bit of strength. It was a small, weary thing that contradicted his lifelong creed. Hurriedly, Lynn counted out 7 galleons, set them on the counter, grabbed the wand box and the cage containing his northeast snowy owl, and bolted from the shop like a startled rabbit, leaving Ollivander alone amid his rows of wands, wondering where his certainty had gone. Dumbledore had finished his errand as well. After a brief farewell, he apparated away. Engraving successful, acquired apparition. Lynn walked back toward the intersection by the trash can, feeling elated. He had just obtained his first magic. His leg itched, and on impulse, he kicked the trash can aside. Humming, he headed home, eager to try out his new wand. 4. School starts. The days before term began were busy and satisfying for Lynn. The first thing he did was add every spell from the first-year textbooks into his skill library, everything from the levitation charm and the wand lighting charm in the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, to various odd little bits of magic. Instant mastery, ready to use. In an instant, he was a qualified first-year wizard. He had also secretly tested the apparition he had plucked from Headmaster Dumbledore. That skill was simply too useful. He no longer had to walk to the river to fish. With a thought and a crack, he could appear at his usual fishing spot. Unfortunately, the convenience of magic hadn't changed his reputation as the king of blanking. He still went every day in high spirits and returned dejected, not a single fish scale to show for his efforts. He began to suspect that some wicked wizard had cast the legendary blanking curse on that stretch of river. No way, no way. Lynn muttered at his empty fish bucket. Is there any fisherman today who can blank as steadily as I do? This isn't normal. Time flew, and the start of term arrived in the blink of an eye. Lynn slung his seemingly empty extension trunk, stuffed with all sorts of things, yet as light as an empty box, over his shoulder and pushed into the bustle of King's Cross Station. He pulled out the acceptance letter Dumbledore had given him to check the platform. Platform 9 3/4. What the heck? 9 3/4? Lynn muttered, annoyed at another bit of wizarding eccentricity. He tucked the letter away and watched. Families in slightly vintage clothing hurried toward the stone barrier between platforms 9 and 10. One moment they were there, the next, whoosh, they vanished into the pillar. Oh, so that's how it is, Lynn thought, deciding it was a cooler way of getting through than tapping a brick wall. He ran toward the pillar himself and, instead of a hard impact, felt a brief chill like passing through a curtain of cold water. The next moment, he stood on a new, noisy platform. A scarlet steam engine waited beside the platform, a prominent sign on its front declaring Hogwarts Express. Steam clouded the air with the cries of pets and the clamor of students. The first few carriages were packed. Lynn had arrived a bit late. He used the levitation charm to make his trunk float behind him and walked to the end of the train until he found a relatively empty compartment. He collapsed into a window seat and let out a long sigh. He'd been too excited to sleep the night before, and the long journey to Hogwarts was the perfect chance to catch up. He pulled a comfortable sleep mask from his trunk, put it on, adjusted his posture, and was just drifting off when a wet, sticky sensation slapped his face. Lynn jerked upright and ripped off the mask. A toad sat on the small table in front of him, staring with dull, bulging eyes while its mouth twitched. He had been licked awake by a toad. A system notification blinked into his mind. Ding. Task issued. A hungry heirloom toad detected. Feed it to obtain. Tongue twister. Effect. The target's tongue will experience brief confusion and inversion, causing jumbled speech for 1 minute. The effect cannot be dispelled during this period. Lynn read the message and had to smile. Being licked by a toad for a little magic didn't seem so bad. The toad blinked and croaked in a raspy voice. My master is lost. I forgot where I lost him. I'm very hungry now. Lynn appreciated that his lang mastery even covered toad speak. As if on cue, the snack trolley creaked to the compartment door. Do you eat sweets? He asked. The toad nodded. Lynn bought chocolate frogs, Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, and other treats. The toad devoured everything greedily. When it was finished, it burped, hopped out of the carriage, waved a front paw like a little human, and called back indistinctly, Goodbye, kind person. I hope you don't fail any subjects at your new school. Task completed. Obtained magic, tongue twister. Lynn watched the toad bounce away and felt a little bemused by how much the creature seemed to know. Outside the window, London's cityscape fell away, replaced by open fields, then dense forests, winding rivers, and dark green hills. When night fell, the train reached its destination, Hogsmeade Station. First years over here, a booming voice called over the noise. Lynn turned and was speechless. He had never seen anyone so tall and broad as the man who strode toward them. My name is Rubus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts, and I'm here to take you into the castle. Hagrid held a giant lantern and smiled with simple, honest warmth. All right, let's start boarding the boats. Don't keep the professors waiting. Hagrid pointed to a line of small boats moored by the lake and shouted, Remember, no more than 4 people to a boat. Lynn found himself in a small boat with 3 other first years, all of whom glanced at him with curiosity. Hagrid, alone in an oversized boat, turned to check that everyone was aboard. Then, off we go. At his word, the small boats moved as if pulled by invisible ropes, cutting across the black, ink-smooth lake toward the towering castle. They slipped past ivy-covered cliffs, through a dark tunnel, and finally into a place that looked like an underground dock. Hagrid led them up a gravel path to a huge oak door set in the shadow of the castle. Waiting there was a witch in emerald green robes, her hair in a severe bun, her expression sharp and composed. Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here, she said crisply. Hagrid grinned at the first years and left with his lantern. The woman looked them over with a stern sweep of her gaze. Welcome to Hogwarts, she said. I am Professor McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress, Head of Gryffindor House, and your Transfiguration Professor. She pushed open the giant oak doors and led the first years into the castle. The entrance hall was enormous, blazing torches along stone walls, a ceiling so high the top vanished in shadow, and a grand marble staircase leading upward. Professor McGonagall did not take them into the great hall immediately. Instead, she led them into a quiet room off the entrance hall. The start-of-term banquet will begin shortly, she informed them. Looking at the anxious, eager faces, she added sternly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you must first be sorted into your houses. The sorting ceremony is a very important tradition. After explaining the four houses, she said she needed to step away for a moment and asked the first years to wait quietly. She would return shortly to lead them into the Great Hall for the sorting ceremony. 5. Hannah the Blacksmith. After Professor McGonagall left, the oppressive silence in the empty room broke instantly as the new students began chattering about the mysterious, terrifying sorting ceremony. "My brother said we have to fight a monster," a red-haired boy declared with the proud certainty of someone who knew a secret. "A monster?" another girl cried, her voice trembling. "I heard you have to recite some complicated spell, and if you get it wrong, you'll turn into a frog." Rumors grew wilder and more alarming by the minute. Someone spoke of fighting monsters, others of casting advanced magic, and more whispers about trolls and giants spread through the group. Lynn, standing off to the side and hearing everything, felt his mouth twitch and a sudden urge to drop out sprout in his mind. Is Hogwarts really this dangerous? Trolls and giants? If I'd known, I wouldn't have agreed when Dumbledore came to deliver the letter. He said Hogwarts is the safest place in the world. Safest, my foot. He felt small and helpless, imagining his future as pitch black. Just as he seriously considered slipping back into the Muggle world, Professor McGonagall returned. She looked at the nervous little ones, made tenser by the rumors, and keeping her expression serious, said, "Now, form a single file and follow me." With the sort of tragic resignation reserved for heroes marching off to doom, Lynn joined the line and followed her into the Great Hall. At a single glance, he was stunned. The Great Hall was larger than anything he'd expected. Students sat at four long house tables, and glowing candles floated above, bathing the room in warm light. The ceiling was velvet black, dotted with twinkling stars like a real night sky. Lynn's eyes drifted to the high table and found a smiling, white-bearded man seated in the center, Professor Dumbledore. Of all people, this old man was the headmaster, he realized with a mental nudge to himself. Professor McGonagall led the first years to the front of the high table and had them stand facing the older students. She set a small stool to the side and solemnly put an old, ragged, pointed hat, patched and dirtied until it looked older than anyone present, on the stool. "When I call your name, come forward and sit," she instructed. "I will place the sorting hat on your head, and the hat will decide which house you belong to." Everyone stared at the tattered hat in wide-eyed shock. Just this hat? Not fighting a monster? The older students, whatever their houses, exchanged amused, knowing smiles. Then, with a sudden crack like a mouth opening, the edge of the hat folded into what looked like eyes and brows. The hat wriggled and broke into song. "You may not think I'm pretty." The song finished. Professor McGonagall cleared her throat, unrolled a long parchment, and called out, "Hannah Abbott!" A rosy-cheeked girl with two golden braids stumbled forward. The hat barely touched her head before it cried, "Hufflepuff!" The second table from the right exploded in applause and cheers. Hannah ran happily to join them. Names continued to be called, houses assigned, until Professor McGonagall read, "Lynn." Lynn swallowed, stepped forward, and sat on the stool. She placed the sorting hat on his head. Thoughts and a voice threaded through his mind. An interesting child. Likes fishing, but can't catch anything. What a peculiar hobby. Lynn felt an immediate urge to rip the hat off and stomp on it. How can a tattered hat know how to point out people's flaws? Oh ho, what a wicked little imp to want to treat the weather-beaten hat of wisdom like that, the hat replied in his mind. "I think you should be sent to Azkaban to keep company with the Dementors." Although Lynn didn't know exactly what Azkaban was, the name sounded awful enough. His internal thoughts in response grew less polite. "Oh, Merlin's beard, your inner thoughts are so colorful," the hat exclaimed. "All right, let's see. Shrewd, willing to use a little trickery to get what you want. In a sense, you'd fit Slytherin." Lynn began a new round of mental protests, less than courteous, and chanted to himself, "I want Hufflepuff, Hufflepuff. It looks comfortable there. Hufflepuff, it's full of loyalty and kindness, but you have a streak of hidden darkness. Though your craving for comfort is real. Such a stubborn little fellow." After a tug of war in his head that felt like minutes, the sorting hat finally seemed resigned to Lynn's insistence. "Sigh, all right, since you're so determined. Hufflepuff," it announced at last. Lynn took the hat off, handed it back to Professor McGonagall, and walked toward the Hufflepuff table as they applauded warmly. The prefects and older students quickly made room, patting him on the back in welcome. When Harry Potter was called later, a ripple went through the hall. After a beat, the hat announced Gryffindor, and cheers from that table nearly shook the roof. A pair of red-haired twins couldn't resist shouting, "We got Potter! We got Potter!" After the sorting ceremony, Dumbledore rose to speak, smiling. He reminded everyone the term had begun, then gave the usual cautions. Students were forbidden from entering the Forbidden Forest, wand-waving and other magic were not allowed in the corridors, and with special emphasis, the fourth-floor corridor on the right is strictly off-limits unless you wish to die a very painful death. Finally, he snapped something nonsensical, nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak, and proclaimed, "Now, let the feast begin." At once, the once-empty golden plates filled with tempting food. As the chaotic Hogwarts school song wound to a close, the opening feast ended, and the Hufflepuff first years followed their prefects toward the common room underground. After parting ways from the Slytherins, who headed in a different direction, they passed a painting of a silver bowl of fruit and arrived at an unremarkable corner on the far right of the corridor. There, many barrels were stacked in rows. "Unlike the other houses, our entrance doesn't use a password. It needs a little rhythm instead," one of the prefects explained. "See the second barrel from the middle of the second row? Tap the bottom of it to the rhythm of Helga Hufflepuff, like this." He demonstrated. With the right pattern tapped, the lid of the barrel swung open silently, revealing a circular passage big enough to crawl through. It really did feel like a badger's burrow, Lynn thought, but he crawled in with everyone else. The Hufflepuff common room was cozy and round, with a low domed ceiling, colorful tapestries, and plenty of plants. Soft yellow and black armchairs were scattered about, and low round windows looked out onto swaying grass in the sky. How could there be a sky underground? Lynn wondered, half amused. The moment they entered, a warm, comforting feeling wrapped around them. It was already chilly in England in early September, but here it felt like spring. Lynn inhaled and thought that choosing Hufflepuff had been a wise decision. The atmosphere matched everything he'd imagined, comfortable and friendly. Next, the prefects assigned dormitories. Lynn was placed in a room with 3 roommates. Edgar Burns had light brown hair and freckles. He'd been born and raised in the wizarding world and greeted everyone cheerfully. According to him, his parents worked at the Ministry of Magic, and his family was a branch of the Burns family. William Smith, wearing neat glasses, looked serious and organized. Both his parents were Muggles, and magic had only awakened in his generation. Before the Hogwarts letter, he'd aimed for Eton. He clearly had the makings of a top student. Ollie Thorne was quieter, with dark hair and eyes. He mentioned that his mother had died and that his father, a non-magical businessman, had initially refused to tell him about magic or let him come to Hogwarts until Headmaster Dumbledore personally persuaded him. Good grief, Lynn thought. Between his own split life and Ollie's family situation, none of them could quite claim a complete set of parents. What a strange fate it all was. 6. This herbology class is amazing. After a night of baring their souls and late-night chats, Lynn, Edgar, William, and Ollie, 4 boys with very different personalities, had quickly formed a solid roommate friendship. At least, they were decent friends. Early the next morning, a sleepy voice called, "Lynn, wake up." In his dream, Lynn was sitting on a sunny riverbank when the 13 in his hand suddenly jerked violently. He was ecstatic, grabbed the 13D, and felt a heavy pull from underwater. Skillfully, he began to reel it in. The strength said this was a big one. The fish drew closer to shore, and its outline appeared. Then it broke the surface. Full of anticipation, Lynn looked down. What came up out of the water wasn't shimmering scales, but a bright, smiling face with a few freckles. It was Edgar shouting, "Lynn, wake up! If you don't get up, you'll be late." "My fish!" Lynn cried in mock tragedy, and then jolted awake, heart racing. He opened his eyes groggily and nearly ran into Edgar's face. "Fish? What fish?" Edgar blinked. "Hurry and get ready. Our first class is herbology in the greenhouse outside the castle. If you dawdle, you really will be late." Lynn sighed and rolled out of his warm bed. He hurriedly packed 1,000 magical herbs and fungi and that 3 were essential. There wasn't much else. Looking at his messy hair and sleepy eyes in the mirror, Lynn pointed his 25 at himself and said, "Scourgify!" Magic sure is convenient. In an instant, he switched from sleep mode to fresh and clean, handsome young man mode. Whoa, cool! William, wrestling with the wrinkles in his robes, brightened. Lynn, do me too! Me too, Edgar added, rushing forward. Even Ollie, who had been quietly organizing his bag, shot an expectant look. Lynn shrugged and cast Scourgify on each of his 3 roommates in turn. Looking at his now energetic, glowing companions, he nodded with satisfaction. Yes, this looked much better. They finished packing, bolted down breakfast in the Great Hall, then set off through the castle's moving staircases and endless corridors. After asking nearly headless Nick, 3 ghosts from other houses, a map that kept pointing the wrong way, and a group of overly helpful but directionally vague suits of armor, they finally found the greenhouse behind the castle, panting. Lynn pushed the greenhouse door open first. A wave of warm, humid air, soil and fertilizer, and the fresh scent of plants hit them. "Good morning, Professor," the group greeted politely. Being Hufflepuffs, they had a natural fondness for this kindly dean. "Hello, children," Professor Sprout smiled. "Find a seat quickly. Class is about to start." They took a row of empty benches and sat. As Lynn set his textbook down on the dew-damp wooden table, a system notification chimed inside his mind. 2 at once. Ding. Mission issued. Answer a question asked by Professor Sprout. Reward, abundance. Effect. Plants planted or nurtured by your own hands will thrive, be relatively immune to pests and disease, be ready for harvest sooner, and yield more. Congratulations, you are 1 step closer to becoming Hogwarts' hidden granary. Plant it to 12 yourself. Reward, blessing of Hogwarts white flower. After casting, all non-fatal injuries and pains that 22 cannot immediately heal will temporarily be placed in an exempted and silent state. You will feel no pain at the injury site, though the injury itself has not healed. Duration. A message from the Tweller. Hope you never have to use it. Lynn's grin stretched from ear to ear. Herbology was amazing. He was absolutely going to learn everything he could. He flipped open 1,000 magical herbs and fungi and skimmed the table of contents for the entry on 12, muttering to himself. Edgar, watching, nudged William and whispered, "What's wrong with him? Is he having an episode?" William pushed up his glasses and considered. Maybe. He suddenly has a strong interest in herbology. The class bell rang crisply. Everyone present, no one late. Professor Sprout began by explaining herbology's importance in potion making, healing, and everyday life. She outlined the course goals, how to identify, plant, care for, and eventually harvest various magical plants, and stressed safety. Without my instruction, you are absolutely not to touch any plant, even if it looks like a harmless daisy. The students blinked, slightly dazed. All right, Professor Sprout continued. Today, we will learn to plant a very practical and relatively safe magical plant. 12. She held up a glass vial of tiny seeds. First, does anyone know what 12 does? Lynn, who had been waiting, shot his hand up so fast he nearly startled Edgar. Seeing a student from her house so eager, Professor Sprout smiled and called on him. Lynn stood and straightened. 12 is a plant with powerful healing and regenerative properties. Its essence can be made into essence of Hogwarts white flower, which quickly heals external wounds and is effective on superficial scars. A very accurate and comprehensive answer. Professor Sprout applauded. 5 points to Hufflepuff. A notification chimed in Lynn's head the instant her words finished. Ding! Mission complete. Reward abundance has been issued. Lynn tamped down his excitement and sat, trying to look composed as his roommates shot him surprised, admiring glances. Ollie whispered, "So that's what he was doing earlier." "Now I will demonstrate how to plant 12 correctly," Professor Sprout said, and began a careful demonstration, choosing and tilling the soil, placing the seed, the right depth of cover, and initial watering. Since the seeds were not particularly dangerous, she demonstrated once and then allowed the students to collect seeds for practical work. Lynn practically ran forward to receive his seeds. He chose a spot with good light and humidity, followed the steps Professor Sprout had shown, while also following an inexplicable instinct. He gently placed a seed into the soft soil, watered it to settle the roots, and pressed the surface firm. As he finished the final pat, another chime rang in his mind. Ding! Mission complete. Obtained blessing of Hogwarts white flower. Chapter 7. Today is a great day for fishing. After enduring that sleep-inducing history of magic class in the morning, Lynn's serious business for the day was done, leaving him with a generous stretch of free time. History of magic was taught by a ghost, Professor Binns. This 12, how to put it, Lynn seriously suspected the man was getting senile. When taking attendance, he stared at the students below with empty eyes, as if cataloging prehistoric specimens, and couldn't even clearly remember who belonged to which house. Yet once he began narrating the six, it was like unrolling a dusty chronicle. He knew every era, every event, and didn't need to look at the textbook. Ghosts, Lynn thought, are a kind of lingering spirit, usually tethered to the world by some stubborn obsession. Watching Professor Binns float back and forth on the podium, Lynn couldn't help but wonder what obsession kept him here. Did the poor man wake up a ghost and then realize the school didn't have to pay him a salary, benefits, or bonuses? This Hogwarts doesn't seem very proper, he concluded. The history of magic class finally ended, courtesy of a narration that might rank as a top-tier sleeping charm. Lynn shuffled out drowsily, almost dragging his feet, while his three roommates behind him were bursting with energy. Why were they so lively? Simple. They had slept. Professor Binns's class was universally acknowledged as prime time for catching up on Z's. At lunch in the Great Hall, Lynn considered how to spend his afternoon. Outside the window, the weather was clear with a gentle breeze, perfect fishing weather. After they ate and relaxed, the group returned to the warm, homely Hufflepuff common room. Lynn wasted no time pulling his beloved 8-line hooks and a full set of professional gear from his one. "Are you going fishing?" Edgar asked, eyeing Lynn's fully armed, bright-faced expression with suspicious curiosity. "Wizards fish too?" Lynn blurted out the answer instinctively and immediately regretted it. The question had been as dumb as asking whether Brits eat potatoes. Edgar gave him the kind of look reserved for idiots. "Ahem." Lynn cleared his throat awkwardly and switched topics fast. "Want to come? I've got plenty of 8s. I can lend you one." "Really? But I don't know how." Edgar sounded hesitant but intrigued. "No problem. I'll teach you until you've got it," Lynn said, patting his chest with confident bravado. "That sounds interesting," William said, pushing up his glasses, curiosity lighting his face. "Well, I'll go too." Even Ollie, usually quiet and reserved, was drawn to the group activity and wanted in. So that afternoon, the Hufflepuff common room produced a peculiar sight. 4 first-years, each carrying an empty 13-teen and holding 8s of varying lengths, marched out in high spirits, crossed the corridors, and headed outside the 15-heen. They crossed the wide lawn and reached the shore of the Black Lake. "First, let's pick our spots," Lynn announced. "Look, this spot's great. The current's gentle. There's aquatic grass." Edgar scanned the water. "Then you do this. And then that. Watch the 19 carefully. When you feel a tug, don't yank." Lynn jabbered on, laying out a string of theories and techniques. "Did you all get it?" His 3 apprentices looked a little lost, but nodded anyway, pretending they understood. Seeing their affirmation, Lynn stopped lecturing, chose a prime spot for himself, readied his gear, and cast his first line of the day. As his hook hit the water, a system prompt chimed inside his head. "Ding! Task issued. Catch a fish. Reward, torrential impact." Upon use, the 21 tip will shoot out a highly compressed, high-speed rotating water jet, powerful enough to knock down a troll. You'll probably use it to put out fires, right? Probably. Seeing a system task made Lynn even more excited. He remembered the golden rule: no bait, no big catch. He sprinkled another handful of the 23 he'd prepared near his 19, held his breath, and fixed his gaze on the bobber floating on the surface, waiting for something to happen. The world opened up for someone else first. "It moved! It moved!" Edgar shouted, his rod trembling. He clumsily mimicked Lynn's instructions, fought a bit with the line, and finally reeled in a plump-looking for about 3 pounds. As if a switch had flipped, William and Ollie soon had bites too. They each hauled in a decent-sized 24. Time moved slowly for Lynn as he sat motionless. His 19 seemed glued to the water, not even twitching. He watched the growing pile of fish in his roommate's 13s and then stared down at his own empty one. He considered switching spots with Edgar and the others, but his pride as a self-styled fishing master wouldn't let him. "Lynn, haven't you caught anything yet?" Edgar called over, now the picture of concerned helpfulness. Lynn flushed and, sticking to his ego, said, "What do you know? I'm waiting for a big one. Those little ones you're catching aren't for me." He absolutely refused to admit that he might, once again, end the day empty-handed. "Oh, I see," Edgar nodded, not entirely convinced. "All right, we're heading back to the common room first to take these to the 14, so the house elves can prepare dinner. You should head back early, too." With that, Edgar, William, and Ollie picked up their catches and started toward the 50. Watching their retreating backs, Lynn sighed long and low. He stared at the calm lake and muttered, "Is this the legendary newbie protection thing? Why does it always skip me?" He waited some more. The sun sank lower, gilding the lake with gold, but his 19 stayed stubbornly still. Patience nearly gone, Lynn began packing his auxiliary gear, preparing to accept another empty-handed return. Then a huge fat 2, easily over 10 pounds, ambled into the shallow water near the shore. Right in front of him, it began leisurely nibbling at the aquatic grass, as if to sneer at his fruitless afternoon. Lynn scowled at the leving gliding there, then at his still empty 13. That was a provocation too much. He abandoned any sense of angling ethics. He grabbed a handy stone from the shore, took aim at the unaware 22, and hurled it hard. Thud. The stone hit the fish square on the head. It didn't struggle. Within moments, it flipped belly up and drifted motionless on the water. Almost the instant it floated there, the system chimed again. "Ding! Task completed. Obtained torrential impact." Lynn blinked, stunned for a moment, then waded into the water, hauled the overly large 22 ashore, and tossed it into his 13. Triumphantly, he returned to the Hufflepuff common room with a full harvest, delivering the enormous fish to the 14. "We must have extra for dinner tonight," he announced, beaming. Chapter 8. It was worth the trip to Hogwarts. "Lynn, time to get up again. Charms class today. You can't be late." Edgar's voice arrived like clockwork. Lynn blinked himself awake on the four-poster, grumbling inwardly. "Merlin, Hogwarts has 8 a.m. classes too? 2 lifetimes, and I still can't escape early mornings?" The familiar morning routine followed, a half-hearted struggle out of bed, shoving textbooks and his wand into his bag, and then serving as the group's human cleaning station. Scourgify. He cast the scouring charm on his 3 roommates in turn. "Honestly, can't you learn Scourgify yourselves? It's easy. You get it the first time you see it." On the way to class, Lynn finally blurted out the question that had been nagging him. William pushed his glasses up and answered, as if it were obvious, "Did I ever say I didn't know it? Then why don't you? Lazy." That was the end of the discussion. Lynn looked at Edgar and Ollie, who both wore the same expression. "Why do it if you're here?" He sighed and accepted his lot. They wove through the corridors and arrived at Charms. The atmosphere in the classroom was relaxed and pleasant. Professor Flitwick stood on a stack of thick books so he could be seen above the podium, and in his high, clear voice, introduced the day's lesson, the Lumos charm. "Lumos is a charm of everyday convenience," he said, waving his short arms. "It looks ordinary because it is ordinary." He chuckled at his own joke, then added, "Well, ordinary, but useful. It will help you out of a spot now and then. So today we will learn Lumos." Flitwick demonstrated the movement. The incantation is simply Lumos, a small flick of the wrist like this. He showed them the flick. "All right, let's try it." Just then, Lynn's mind dinged with a system prompt. "Ding! Mission issued. Successfully cast the Lumos charm. Reward, Peter's Jolt. A passive skill that lets you sense danger before it arrives. You can also call it a spider sense. The system feels like you need it, so, you know. A practically free mission." Lynn's grin spread. When Flitwick shut the classroom curtains with a swish to darken the room, the other first-years fussed over the incantation and wrist movement. Lynn impatiently raised his wand and said clearly, "Lumos." With a soft pop, a steady white light bloomed at the tip of his wand, illuminating the nearby desks. "Ding! Mission completed. Obtained Peter's Jolt." Hogwarts was already paying off. As they headed to the next class, Potions in the Dungeons, Lynn tested his new ability. Everything seemed a beat slower, his reactions sharper. He could track the motions and intent of the students around him more clearly. The world felt under his control, and he walked with a little more swagger. The potions classroom in the dungeons was exactly as Edgar had warned, oppressive. Edgar tried to break the tension with gossip. I heard the potions master talks in this weird, sarcastic drawl. How so? William asked, pushing his glasses up. Students say he deducted points from Harry Potter right off the bat once, just for not answering some questions. And he asks for answers as soon as he walks in, like some big, sad bat. He's always sneering. Lynn listened with more interest than he could admit. This was better than another lecture on goblins and gobbledygook. Then he felt the hairs on his arms lift and hissed, "Shh! Stop talking!" Edgar and the others shut up at once. The door opened and a black-cloaked figure slid inside. With a flick of his wand, the room went darker as the curtains snapped closed. He began his opening remarks in a low, viscous voice, full of contempt for foolish wand-waving and praise for the subtlety of potion-making. Snape's opening monologue was exactly as described, acidic, cutting, and meant to make everyone small and uneasy. Lynn expected a volley of questions to pin down the unlucky, but instead Snape scanned the silent room, sneered, and launched straight into theory, today's lesson being how to brew a boil cure potion. Ding! Mission issued. Brew a boil cure potion. Reward: potions fair. Effect: you can consistently reproduce any potion you have studied. After reading or hearing a potion recipe, you immediately understand its principles and can instinctively make optimal adjustments. The quality of potions you brew will be significantly enhanced. You probably won't try to use this to brew a potion to suit Professor Snape's personal tastes, right? Snape was an excellent potions master. His method for the boil cure differed from the textbook in the order of processing ingredients, the number and direction of stirs, and the precise heat adjustments. It seemed more efficient, if you could ignore his constant sarcasm and the venom that could be spat at any misstep. Oh, it seems our clever student needs no notes. Presumably, he already knows everything I am teaching, Snape drawled beside Edgar. 1 point from Hufflepuff for arrogance. He moved on to a Ravenclaw. Anthony Goldstein, you answer, why must these ingredients be crushed so finely? Because, Goldstein floundered, clearly flummoxed because Snape hadn't explained the reason. Very well, Snape said, the corner of his mouth twitching into almost a smile. It seems Ravenclaw's wisdom is not evident in comprehension. He docked a point from Ravenclaw. After the nerve-jangling theory, it was time for practical work. Snape prowled between the tables like a hungry predator, his presence alone a pressure. Whenever a technique slipped, he materialized behind the student with helpful commentary. Has your brain been trampled by a troll? Why are your slices that thick? Do you expect the boil to swallow them whole? Oh, what have we here? A new potions genius. He can even disregard the guidance of his predecessor and perform an innovative and disastrous operation. Are you related to a troll? You actually dare to touch the rim of a cauldron just removed from the fire with your bare hands? I'm sure St. Mungo's would be delighted to welcome a fresh case of severe burns. Under Snape's periodic onslaught of insults, Lynn stuck to the instructions and followed the steps precisely. Snape came to his table, scooped out a spoonful, peered and sniffed, and then gave an almost inaudible snort. He said nothing and turned away. Ding! Mission completed. Obtained potions favor. Mission complete, but Lynn's mood wasn't cheery. He'd taken more than his share of Snape's barbs and felt the sting of the man's judgment. He clenched his jaw. Just you wait, Snape. A gentleman's revenge is never late, but tomorrow is too late. Have you heard? Snape! Whispers ricocheted through the common room, but Edgar was too busy poking at a book to care. He jabbed at the cover and mimicked Snape's slow, oily drawl. Mr. Burns, is your head full of gillyweed? Who does he think he is, saying that? I hadn't even had time to light a fire under that cauldron, William fumed, adjusting his glasses. How could he be so sure I was bound for St. Mungo's? My troll snot slug, Edgar muttered, as if it were a talisman. I hadn't even started chopping it. Even Ollie, normally quiet, let a soft complaint slip out. Lynn listened to the chaotic grievances, the sting of potions, the old woman's ever-present venom, and rolled his eyes. Okay, lads, don't just get steamed. I've got an idea. He lowered his voice, motioning for the others to lean in, and began to whisper the plan. Will it work? Isn't it too obvious? William asked first, doubt written across his face. Lynn smacked the table once, more with conviction than force. Answer this. Can you swallow the insult or not? Are you going to do something about it? Do it, Edgar said immediately, eyes bright with the thrill of mischief. Ollie nodded. William hesitated, glanced from face to face, and then gave a heavy nod. Do it. Right then, Lynn said, satisfied. The plot was set. It was almost midday when the four of them slipped into the great hall. It was still quiet before lunch. The house tables were mostly empty. They moved like conspirators, their target clear, the Gryffindor table. Why do I have to be the one to hide these notes? Edgar complained, holding a stack of little slips he'd cut from parchment. He looked both reluctant and smug. You were the loudest back there, Lynn said. If anyone deserves the fun, it's you. And why Gryffindor? Ollie asked. Wouldn't it be safer to put them at our table? Lynn gave him a look that said he hadn't thought things through at all. Slytherin would hand them straight to Snape. Ravenclaw wouldn't care. Gryffindor, they live for trouble and they love to gossip. That'll spread everything like flint to kindling. Besides, if it doesn't come from us, no one will suspect Hufflepuff. Let the priest take the fall, not the common folk. They didn't entirely follow Lynn's odd metaphor, but they got the idea. Let Gryffindor stir the pot. They set to work with the efficiency of children on a mission. Slip one into this roast chicken, Lynn directed. Shove one under that pumpkin pie, Edgar said, grinning. Mix one into the vegetable bowl and tuck it at the bottom, William added. And hide one in the bread basket, Ollie supplied. While they worked, Lynn muttered odd lines under his breath, things about nobles and special stock, and whether Snape might belong to such a class. The others were baffled, but took it as evidence of artistic depth. Even their rebellion sounded cultured. When the hall filled and students began to sit, the four of them took a seat with a clear view of the Gryffindor table and pretended casual interest. It didn't take long. One of the Weasleys, the twins were indistinguishable in the moment, bit into a roast chicken, made a puzzled noise, and pulled a grease-smudged note from his mouth. He read it, his eyes widening, and then exploded into uproarious laughter, thwacking the other twins back and shoving the note across the table. What did you write? Lynn elbowed Edgar, whispering. Edgar lowered his voice and smirked. Heh, I wrote, according to unreliable sources, Professor Snape gives Harry Potter special attention because he has an odd preference for boys with black hair and green eyes. Love revealed as cruelty, folks. Lynn almost choked on his grin. I wrote, inside scoop, Professor Snape has long coveted the headmaster's job and is secretly plotting to overthrow Dumbledore. He plans to become Minister for Magic and reform the wizarding world. William, listening in incredulously, couldn't help but protest. Do you honestly think anyone will believe that? It's outrageous. Doesn't matter, Lynn said, shrugging. Rumors morph. That's the fun part. And morph they did. The notes hit the Gryffindor table like sparks in dry tinder. Within minutes, the story mutated and spread. By mid-afternoon, there were dozens of versions drifting through the castle. Snape has a crush on Harry. He deducts points just to get his attention. Snape's going to run for Minister for Magic. He'll change the Statute of Secrecy. I heard Snape and Dumbledore are going to duel to the death for Harry. Latest, Snape is Harry's long-lost father. Dumbledore split them up. Snape turned love into hatred. The rumors snowballed, each retelling adding spice, romance, ambition, duels, and moral outrage, until by evening it had become a sensational, scandalous epic. Professor Snape is secretly involved with Harry Potter. Dumbledore opposes them. Snape's love turned to hatred, so he's challenging Dumbledore to a duel for custody of Harry. He plans to run for Minister for Magic afterward and change the laws to allow teacher-student relationships and other complicated arrangements. Younger students gaped. Older students smirked and added their own embellishments. The whole castle buzzed. Wherever Snape went, he felt curious, fearful, and sometimes pitying glances. His already sullen face grew darker. Lynn watched it all take off, utterly pleased with himself. In such a mood, he decided to go fishing at the Black Lake that night to savor the victory. He carried his rod and hummed as he sat by the water for 2 hours. When the moon stood high, he trudged back to the dormitory, his fish basket empty. The fish weren't biting tonight, he told himself with a half-hearted shrug, still basking in the day's chaos. 10. Can't we even pet cats anymore? Can't we even pet cats anymore? No matter what day of the week it was, today was Lynn's first transfiguration class. Just as he followed his friends into the classroom, a system prompt sounded in his mind. Ding, mission issued. Communicate with a cat and receive a response. Reward, Transfiguration Mastery. Effect, you possess extraordinary intuition and comprehension regarding the essence and rules of transfiguration. Your efficiency in learning and applying transfiguration is doubled. Surely no one actually fails to understand transfiguration, right? You'll definitely get it anyway. That's just how confident we are. Transfiguration wasn't like other subjects. You couldn't master it by simply waving a wand, reciting spells, and practicing harder. It was profound, demanding an understanding of the essence of magic and personal insight. Rote memorization and mechanical repetition accomplished little unless you were genuinely a once-in-a-million genius. Seeing the mission and glancing at the dignified cat perched on the podium, Lynn felt a secret thrill. Another freebie. He stepped forward, put on his friendliest smile, and whispered, "Hello." The cat raised its head, amber eyes flicking toward him, and answered with a soft meow, which sounded almost like a greeting. Ding, mission complete. Reward, Transfiguration Mastery has been distributed. A refreshing wave of insight about transforming matter and precise control of magic flooded Lynn's mind, and everything snapped into place. For a moment, though, the cat's meow nagged at him as oddly familiar. He pushed the thought aside, too pleased about his new talent to dwell on it. Not many students had arrived yet, and the cat was still elegantly settled on the podium, casually licking a paw. A mischievous idea popped into his head. Could he pet the cat a little longer? Professor McGonagall hadn't arrived yet. Rare opportunity. With a mischievous grin, he reached out his hand toward the cat. Just as his fingertips were about to touch that smooth-looking fur, a sudden sense of danger made his skin prickle. He froze. Wait, this cat can't be petted? Is there something wrong? The cat looked up at the exact same moment. Lynn swallowed hard. Deciding it was better to avoid trouble, he withdrew his hand and acted as if nothing had happened. He hurriedly pulled Edgar, William, and Ollie over and found a spot in the middle of the room to sit. The bell rang on time. When it stopped, the cat leaped from the podium. As it landed, its shape shifted. Fur receded, limbs stretched, and in an instant it had transformed into a woman in emerald robes with a stern expression and a perfectly coiled bun. It was the Dean of Gryffindor, Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts, a Master of Transfiguration, and their instructor, Professor Minerva McGonagall. Lynn nearly jumped out of his chair. Relief flooded him as recognition hit. That familiar meow had been hers. Thank goodness he hadn't stupidly tried to pet her. He pictured the inevitable punishment, points docked for profaning a professor and maybe repeating a year, and patted his chest in relief. Professor McGonagall paused, her sharp gaze scanning the room and lingering on Lynn for a fraction of a second before she spoke. This is the first transfiguration lesson I will be giving you. I am pleased that no one is late. Her voice was as clear and authoritative as ever. Transfiguration is among the most complex and dangerous branches of magic you will study at Hogwarts. Anyone who messes about in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. Like other instructors, she began with theory, basic principles of transfiguration, essential wand work, and the subtle differences in spell pronunciation. Her explanations were clear and exact. Thanks to the Transfiguration Mastery gift, the concepts seemed to etch themselves into Lynn's mind naturally. He grasped them with unusual clarity. Next, she said, and with a flick of her wand, a pile of matches flew neatly onto each desk. I am giving each of you a match. Your task is to turn it into a needle. She added, with a hint of helplessness in her tone, I hope there won't be any explosions. Everyone knew she meant Seamus Finnegan, the boy who had a habit of turning most spells into little detonations, even when brewing relatively stable potions. Lynn took a steadying breath, picked up his match, and placed it on the desk. Vera Verto. He waved his wand. The match was enveloped by an invisible force. It lengthened and thinned so fast it was visible to the eye. The tip sharpened, and the wooden grain vanished in favor of a metallic sheen. In almost the blink of an eye, a gleaming silver sewing needle lay on his desk, complete with a tiny, perfect eye. Professor McGonagall's patrolling gaze snapped to him. She came over, lifted the needle, and examined it closely, surprise and approval written across her face. "What am I seeing?" she asked, a trace of excitement in her voice. "Mr. Lynn has completed an exceptional transformation, not just changing the shape, but the material as well. 10 points to Hufflepuff." A ripple of amazement went through the classroom. Hufflepuff students swelled with pride. Edgar even gave Lynn a discreet thumbs up. Lynn himself was a little stunned. He hadn't expected the Transfiguration Mastery talent to take effect so immediately. During the holidays, he had tried Transfiguration a few times, but it had always been awkward. The match would twist and only become slightly pointed or freeze in a half-wood, half-metal state. Never had it been this smooth. System-produced goods were definitely high quality, he thought, grinning inwardly. Nothing happened today. Fishing was out of the question. Rain spattered against the Hogwarts window panes, and the world outside was a bleak, steady gray. Even Lynn, the self-proclaimed king of the air, knew that going out in weather like this would be pure misery. With nothing to do, he decided to explore the castle library. Hogwarts was 1,000 years old. The library had to hold countless books, and it seemed like a safe place to be. It would be a good chance to broaden his skill set and add a few things with engrave. He had another reason, too. A few days earlier, he'd overheard Edgar mention the dark arts in passing. The phrase had sounded powerful and exciting, and Lynn hadn't seen any explicit books on the subject back at Flourish and Blots. Curiosity nudged him toward the archives. Inside the library, the ceilings rose high. Shelves stretched away in every direction, and the air smelled of old parchment, ink, and a faint, peculiar magical dust. A witch moved between the stacks, tidying. Lynn collected himself and walked over to greet her. "Hello, madam," he said. Madam Pince paused, still brisk but not unkind. "Oh, hello, child. What are you looking for in the library?" Lynn thought fast. Dark arts sounded dangerous to say out loud. He didn't want to sound reckless. He tried for a softer approach. "I'm looking for books with really powerful spells, madam. Ones that do a lot of damage." Madam Pince blinked. Then her expression shifted into one of professional recognition. "You're looking for advanced defense against the dark arts material, or perhaps even books on the dark arts themselves. Those are in the restricted section." She pointed to a darker, cordoned-off part of the room. "To consult them, you need a signed note from a professor." Lynn winced inwardly. He wasn't eager to face Snape's venom or McGonagall's glare just for a few books. He pivoted to a safer request. "Then are there any books on defending against the dark arts?" Her expression softened. She indicated a different row of shelves. "Books on theory and practice of defense against the dark arts are over there. And remember, no loud talking in the library, no damaging books, and absolutely no eating." Lynn nodded eagerly and hurried to the recommended section. He scanned titles: common spells and countercharms, fighting fire with fire, defensive spells, dark arts, identification and resistance. He gathered a stack and found a quiet spot by the window. The first book he opened was a thick volume called Dark Arts and White Magic. Dark arts, as the term suggests, are spells intended to harm, control, torture, or kill. Their core often involves the malicious manipulation of life and soul. The introduction read like a sober textbook. Lynn skimmed, mentally tagging the practical spells he could engrave. Stupefy, essential for putting opponents down. Fire-making spell, useful for starting a fire, cooking, or burning things. Freezing charm, not glamorous, but handy. Disillusionment charm, ideal for sneaking about at night. Expelliarmus, elegant and non-lethal. Blasting curse, simple and brutal. Bone-shattering spell, terrifyingly effective, though surely dark. He felt like a shopper in a supermarket, mentally crossing items off a list as Engrave activated and copied each spell into his skill library. He flipped through pages at speed, absorbing lines in short bursts. "Hello, excuse me," a clear, slightly anxious voice said beside him. "Have you finished reading these books? There's one I need." Lynn looked up to see a girl with thick brown hair and noticeable front teeth in Gryffindor robes about his age. She pointed at his pile. Every book he had already engraved and planned to return. "Yes, I'm done with them. Take whatever you need," he said. She picked up the top volume, Dark Arts, Identification and Resistance, and flicked through it in surprise. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Hermione Granger. Lynn, Hufflepuff, he replied. Have you really finished all of these? She asked, eyes wide. Yeah, learned some spells. He said it matter-of-factly. To him, engraving a spell into his library was the same as learning it. They talked briefly. Hermione was from a Muggle family and an excellent student. She had wanted to go to Eton, and her father was a dentist. Lynn thought, not for the first time, that Hogwarts seemed to be attracting a lot of talented kids. When Hermione asked about his home, he answered simply, I don't have parents. There was a small, awkward silence. Hermione flushed and apologized immediately. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. It's okay, Lynn waved it off. He really didn't mind. To him, that kind of thing was ordinary for a transmigrator. The subject dropped and they moved on. Hermione settled opposite him with her chosen book, while Lynn resumed his speedy engraving. From her point of view, this Hufflepuff boy was astonishing, flipping through books as if they were nothing. It was both frustrating and awe-inspiring to someone who prided herself on diligent study. Eventually, Lynn finished the last book, stretched, and cast a casual time-telling spell. Dinner time, he announced, brightening. Food came first. Nothing could stop an 11-year-old whose feet were still growing from rushing to the Great Hall. He tidied the books to return them, gave Hermione a farewell nod, and walked off toward the smell of roast and stew. The library had been fruitful. It was time to reward himself with dinner. Outside the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, a wall of garlic hit Lynn before he even stepped through the door. It was so thick and pungent he nearly stumbled. He backed up 2 steps and rubbed his nose, confused as he checked the sign above the door and then his schedule. This was the right classroom. It wasn't the kitchens or an ingredient cellar. Why did it smell like that? Ugh, what's that smell? It's awful. Edgar, who was behind him, pinched his nose and complained in a muffled voice. William and Ollie also frowned. I don't know, but the bell's about to ring. Let's just go in. Once they entered, the odor intensified, as if the whole room had been soaked in garlic. Students fanned themselves with their hands and books. The bell rang on time. After a short wait, the classroom door opened, and Professor Quirrell, wrapped in his exotic turban, came in, moving a little timidly. Ding! Mission issued. Obtain an official permission slip to enter the library's restricted section from a professor. Reward: only eat the sugar coating. Effect: the shell portion of any magic you learn or cast, including negative effects, side effects, and backlash damage, will be ineffective against you. Eat the sugar coating and throw the shell back. Be a happy freeloader. Lynn read the notification and looked up at Professor Quirrell, who was stuttering at the podium and seemed easy to approach. That should work, he thought. This professor didn't look like the sort who would refuse a student. He decided to try after class. The bell rang, and Quirrell acted as if he'd been granted a pardon, tucking his books under his arm, keeping his head down, and hurrying for the door. Professor! Please wait. Lynn seized the moment and stepped out to block him. Quirrell and the darker presence curled beneath his turban both registered surprise. Quirrell turned slowly to the Hufflepuff who had called him, trying to place the name. Lynn, he thought. Hello? May I ask, is something I can do for you? Lynn swallowed, coughing lightly from the garlic, and said plainly, Professor, I'd like a permission slip to enter the library's restricted section. There was no graceful way to ask for it. Quirrell instinctively opened his mouth to refuse. He began, no, but a voice exploded in his mind. Give it to him, Quirinus. Quirrell jerked. The refusal on his tongue twisted into something else. It's impossible, and not to give it to you, he stammered. When Lynn heard the first no, his heart dropped. He feared the mission had failed. Then Quirrell's odd phrasing followed, and Lynn's mood flipped to delight. The system wouldn't issue an impossible mission. Quirrell really was cooperative. See, come with me, to my office, for a moment, Quirrell said. Lynn practically nodded at once. He waved at Edgar and the others, mouthed, wait here, and followed Quirrell, whose steps were still a bit unsteady, down the corridor. The office smelled even stronger of garlic. Once inside, Quirrell changed. His movements became crisp and efficient, his stuttering gone. Lynn felt suddenly nervous. Mr. Lynn, Quirrell said in a steady voice. I can give you the permission slip. Joy leapt in Lynn's chest. Quirrell's tone shifted. However, there is one prerequisite. Lynn wiped the smile off his face and listened. The condition is that, for the time being, you must study the dark arts with me. Quirrell's lips curled. I imagine a student eager to read from the restricted section wouldn't mind, would you? Lynn's heart skipped. This professor didn't seem so harmless after all. Still, the dark arts sounded powerful, and Lynn had wanted to learn them anyway. The ticket into the restricted section and the system reward made the offer hard to refuse. Formal instruction, even if it felt crooked, was better than nothing. He decided it was worth it. All right, Professor, I'm willing to learn from you. Quirrell nodded with satisfaction. Very well. Every Saturday morning at 8, I will set aside half an hour to instruct you. Here is your permission slip. Keep it safe. He signed a piece of parchment and handed it over. Thank you, Professor, Lynn said, tucking the slip away carefully. He felt elated. He had the only eat the sugar coating reward and an official pass to the restricted section. In high spirits, he decided to celebrate with his usual fishing at the Black Lake. Left alone in his office, Quirrell slumped in his chair and tried to catch his breath. The voice in his head chuckled low and gleeful. Ha ha! Foolish, naive child, a Hufflepuff actually coming to my door to learn the dark arts. That old man Dumbledore, preaching love and courage all day, he would never suspect that in the house he considers the kindest and most innocent, a little badger would actively embrace darkness. Once I lead him astray and let him taste the sweetness of power, watching him fall step by step, Dumbledore's expression then will be priceless. How I look forward to it, haha. Wow, it smells so good. Lynn's remark brought a ripple of curiosity from his friends. Why are you looking for Professor Quirrell? You're being so mysterious. Edgar leaned in, eyes bright. William glanced at them, asking with his expression. Ollie only nodded several times, silent. Lynn waved the signed slip in his hand. It's nothing big. I just needed a signed pass. Anyway, it's settled. So who wants to go fishing this afternoon? Fishing? Edgar immediately shook his head, then brightened. This afternoon is our first flying class. I need to go back to the dorm and nap a bit, so I have energy. Lynn and William exchanged a look of shared bafflement. They still couldn't understand why wizards were so obsessed with flying around on a broomstick that might poke them in the backside. True to his never-go-home-empty-handed policy, Lynn went down to the edge of the Black Lake alone anyway. After an hour and a half in the cold wind, he trudged back to the castle with an empty fish bag and a frustrated scowl. It must be the rod, he grumbled. This muggle fishing rod can't possibly suit magical fish. I'll buy a magic rod next time. That afternoon, the Quidditch pitch was bright and perfect for flying. First years from Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw gathered for their long-awaited first flying lesson. Madam Hooch stood before a neat row of brooms and delivered the usual long explanation of safety rules and theory, how to summon the broom, basic flying posture, emergency procedures. Just as she wrapped up theory and invited everyone to touch the brooms, a system prompt chimed inside Lynn's head. Ding! Mission issued. Experience riding a flying broomstick. Reward 100 skeletons, 1 heart. Effect. You can perfectly control every bone and every muscle in your body, coordinating them to perform any biomechanically sound movement you desire, provided the movement does not exceed your body's structural limits. You can gesture a 6 with your left hand, a 7 with your right, draw a circle with your left foot, and a square with your right, all while keeping a smile. You are now a master of human body manipulation. Lynn's eyes lit up. Practical and useful, he accepted the mission without hesitation. Now you may mount your brooms and fly. Stay safe, Madam Hooch called, and the class erupted in cheers. Lynn, want to play a game of Quidditch? We're setting up a friendly match with Ravenclaw. Edgar shouted, rushing over with his broom. I don't know how to play, Lynn admitted. His knowledge of Quidditch barely extended beyond throw the ball through the hoops and there's a small golden thing. It doesn't matter. I'll teach you. The rules are simple. You'll pick it up, Edgar said, puffing up with confidence. The exchange felt oddly familiar, but Lynn decided to treat it as a chance to complete his mission and enjoy flying. Teams were formed on the spot. Edgar, enthusiastic and rule-savvy, became Seeker. Lynn, who at least didn't trip over his own feet, was put in as chaser to handle the quaffle. William, uninterested in playing, volunteered as referee and borrowed a whistle from Madame Hooch. "Match start!" William blew the whistle. Grar. A dozen brooms rose into the air, wobbling nervously. Lynn mounted his broom and was surprised at how comfortable it felt. The broom seemed to have a gentle cushion and a body-fit magic that made it far less awkward than he'd feared. Ding! Mission complete. Reward obtained. 100 skeletons, 1 heart. Before he had time to fully appreciate the new ability, a red bludger came whistling toward his face. A bludger sent by Anthony Goldstein from Ravenclaw. "Watch out!" Edgar shouted. In a heartbeat, Lynn's body reacted. He leaned back and snapped into a position that looked almost impossible, hinging like an acrobat. He found himself hanging upside down from the broom handle, the quaffle brushing the tip of his nose while his feet remained hooked and in full control of the broom's direction. Anthony's bludger missed by inches. "He could even dodge that!" Anthony cried, half stunned, half impressed. Lynn felt like a new door had opened. The reward's effect let him manipulate every bone and muscle precisely. He moved like water, slipping between opponents and sending the quaffle where the keeper least expected. The Ravenclaw keeper, Terry Boot, did his best, but Lynn could contort his body to angle shots into the goal from impossible positions, diving into bottom corners, tucking under an arm, faking a pass, and turning it into a goal with a quick wrist flick. Another one. Lynn scores again. The Hufflepuff's cheers grew louder with each goal. The Ravenclaw beaters tried to use bludgers to stop him, but Lynn either bent back into an arch and let the bludger fly over, or made an abrupt right-angle turn that threw off the attackers. Once he even performed a sudden mid-air flip, a bludger skidded past the tail of his broom, so close it made everyone's stomach drop. Lynn was calm, half internally amused, predicted the dangerous trajectory, and 100 skeletons, 1 heart, pulled off the extreme dodge. How were they supposed to hit him? Amid the chaos, Edgar swooped and with a practiced grab caught the golden snitch. "Yay, we won!" Edgar cheered, pumping a fist, then glanced up at the scoreboard. The numbers made him blink. 3-10-0, he rubbed his eyes. Wait, how did that happen? He staggered over to where his teammates were gathered, expecting attention for catching the snitch. Instead, everyone was clustered around Lynn, faces full of disbelief and excitement. "What's going on? Why are you all surrounding Lynn?" Edgar asked, pushing through. "Did you see that?" "It was amazing," one student blurted. "Lynn, by himself. He scored 15 goals. 15! Ravenclaw couldn't stop him at all." "One person scored 15 goals?" Edgar gaped and turned to Lynn, who stood in the center of the crowd with a small, satisfied smile. How did you do it? Didn't you say you didn't know how to play?" Edgar demanded. Lynn looked back at him and, as if savoring the moment, simply said, "Oh, wow! It's so good." 14. Dear Professor, let me explain. On Saturday morning, sunlight filtered through the windows of the Hufflepuff basement common room, throwing mottled patches of light across the floor. Lynn lay sprawled on his bed, still dreaming of landing a 100-meter-long catch, a suspicious smear of drool at the corner of his mouth. He felt, vaguely, that he'd forgotten something. Half awake, he rolled over, forced one eye open, groped for his wand on the bedside table, and flicked it lazily into the air. Translucent numbers formed above the blanket. "Only 9, they said. "Weekend mornings are for sleeping in," Lynn muttered, pulling the duvet up with a clear conscience. "Even if the sky falls, it can wait until noon." Hoot, hoot, hoot! An owl's insistent hooting sounded at his bedside. Wings beat against the air. Lynn mumbled through a yawn. "Don't be noisy. I'm at the crucial part of my dream." The owl was not deterred. It pecked lightly at the duvet, determined. Lynn flung the covers back and sat up, rubbing his eyes. A barn owl he didn't recognize stood on his nightstand, head tilted, a letter tied to its leg. How did an owl get into the basement common room, and why his bed, of all places? "A letter for me," he asked, still half asleep. The owl nodded and in a slightly annoyed tone said, "Yes, sign quickly. The sender is in a very bad mood. The air around them is terrifyingly low." Before Lynn could react, it hopped to the nearest table, snatched up a strip of beef jerky he'd left there the night before, swallowed it in 2 bites, flapped its wings, and flew back out through the common room passage. "What bad mood? I didn't offend anyone, did I?" Lynn mumbled, scratching at his messy hair as he opened the letter. The parchment held a single line in a tight, scrawled hand that seemed to be suppressing rage. Mr. Lynn, it seems you have no interest in my Saturday tutoring session. Perhaps I should consider retracting the permission slip? Professor Quirrell. Oh, no! Lynn sprang out of bed. The sleep drained away like water. He had remembered. Defense against the dark arts tutoring with Professor Quirrell. He was nearly an hour late. He threw on clothes, shoved his wand and the precious permission slip into his bag, and didn't even waste time scourgifying his hair. He ran for the Defense Against the Dark Arts office and knocked on the familiar wooden door, still carrying the faint smell of garlic. "Come in," said a voice from within, cool and displeased. Lynn pushed the door open. Professor Quirrell sat behind his desk without his turban. His face was paler than usual. He regarded Lynn with narrow, gloomy eyes and tapped the table like a man counting out the seconds. "Oh," Quirrell drawled in a deliberately long, sarcastic tone that made Lynn's stomach drop with guilty recognition. It reminded him unpleasantly of another professor. Lynn's inner voice protested loudly. "You're Professor Quirrell, not Snape," but he dared not say it aloud. He forced an apologetic face and scrambled for an excuse. "I'm very sorry, Professor. I found some fascinating dark arts texts in the restricted section last night. I got carried away reading and didn't sleep. I really couldn't get up this morning. It won't happen again, I promise." He hadn't spent a minute in the restricted section. He'd been at the Black Lake practicing fishing with no success, then chatting with his roommates all evening. But Quirrell made no attempt to verify the story. Perhaps appearances mattered more than truth. Quirrell snorted, then seemed to relent slightly. A passion for study is forgivable. Don't let it become a habit." He glanced at the clock. "We have 10 minutes. I'll teach you a simple, practical spell, a variant of the fear curse. It induces intense fear and can do real harm, useful for disruption and deterrence." What followed was a rapid 7-minute lesson. Quirrell flicked his wand and a thin electric snake hissed from the tip, accompanied by a tooth-aching sizzling. It struck a training dummy in the corner, leaving a blackened scorch mark. Thanks to Lynn's engrave ability, the moment Quirrell finished, Lynn felt as if the spell had been printed into his mind. "Try it on the dummy in front of you," Quirrell said. Lynn raised his wand and spoke the words he'd just learned. Crack! A spark, nearly identical to Quirrell's demonstration, shot out and hit the dummy dead center, leaving the same black scorch and the same piercing sizzle. The whole thing flowed out of him smoothly, as if he'd done it 1,000 times. Quirrell's face, so stern a moment before, showed a flash of surprise, then something like glee. Not a single word escaped Lynn. He thought furiously, "That's slander. I'm a well-behaved, upright wizard who just wants to learn skills and get free system rewards. Is it my fault I learn fast?" Quirrell recovered his composure and nodded. "Very well. You have been studying. Same time next week, and do not be late." He emphasized the last words. "Yes, Professor. Thank you, Professor." Lynn bowed and backed out of the office as quickly as he could, glad to leave the room that made his skin crawl. Once the door shut, Quirrell let himself slump in his chair and whispered, trembling, "Memmaster, did you really only teach him the ordinary fear curse?" A smooth, calculating voice answered from somewhere inside the room, low, intimate. "How could that be, Quirinus? That was a variant of the fear curse. I've slightly improved. It is more powerful. Its visual effect is more shocking, and it flatters the vanity of a young wizard hungry for power," Quirrell admitted. "More importantly, frequent use will subtly warp his perception of magic." The voice, Lord Voldemort's, purred with cold delight. "If we continue like this, guiding him step by step with stronger, more tempting dark arts, letting him taste the quick sweetness of power, teaching him to solve problems with fear and pain, that old fool Dumbledore will see, very soon, how the docile little badger he trusts slips inch by inch into the abyss. Imagine his face, Quirinus. It will be magnificent." A soft, cruel laugh filled the room. 15. Goodbye, my friend. Lynn was already out of bed, hair a mess from having no time to tidy it with magic, and completely awake. Crawling back under the covers sounded boring, so he felt the permission slip in his pocket and decided to take a stroll to the restricted section, see if there were any treasures to be found. Sunlight poured through the tall library windows, throwing dust-speckled pillars of light across the floor. Madame Pince's gaze swept the entrance like a blade. Lynn stepped forward and produced the slip signed by Professor Quirrell. She took it, adjusted her glasses, scrutinized the signature, then looked up at him with a flicker of surprise. In the end, she gave a professional nod, tapped her wand, and unlocked the gate to the restricted section. "Remember," she warned, "you may read here, but no books are to be removed from the library, and be careful what you read. Some things are not fit for someone your age." "I understand, madam," Lynn said obediently, then plunged into the dimmer aisles where even older, dustier shelves stood. The magic in the air thickened, and the smell of old parchment mixed with something metallic and faintly sweet. He rubbed his hands in excitement and began to browse. But the more he looked, the more his excitement curdled into annoyance. The origins and philosophical foundations of the dark arts. On the mutual influence of the dark arts and the wizard's mind. Taxonomy of dark arts spells, a two-dimensional model based on emotional leverage and magic consumption. Lynn's mouth twitched. What was all this? He'd come to learn spells, not earn a degree in dark arts theory. Whole sections were dense, abstract treatises or historical biographies of notorious dark wizards. Books of practical, step-by-step dark spells were few and far between. Any that existed were either trivial or heavily redacted. He even came across a few with embarrassingly sensational titles: Walking Tall at Hogwarts with the Dark Arts, My Years with the Dark Arts, and, most outrageous of all, a pink-covered volume called My Dark Arts Darling. Merlin's bloomers. How did street stall trash like that end up in the restricted section? He muttered in his head that the place felt less like restricted scholarship and more like a fantasy aisle for overdramatic would-be dark wizards. As he wandered, he realized the truth. The dark arts weren't as broad as everyday magic, and the advanced, dangerous spells were tightly controlled, probably sealed somewhere else. After a long search, he came away with only a handful of books describing minor hexes and harmless little curses. Lynn carried the deceptively dangerous-looking stack to the same spot he had used last time. As luck would have it, the familiar figure was there again, Hermione, surrounded by a mountain of reference volumes. "Lynn?" She looked up from a history of medieval magic, surprised. "I haven't seen you around the library much lately. Has it been that long?" Lynn set his books down and scratched his head. 2-3 days? I don't really remember. Time was fuzzy for him. Most of his free hours lately were spent by the Black Lake with a fishing rod, waiting contentedly for the catch. "Do you come here every day?" he asked casually while sorting his finds. "Pretty much," Hermione said naturally, like stating a fact. The sight of that steady, studious presence made Lynn feel the weight of true academic pressure. He couldn't emulate it. He still preferred lakeshore patience. "Impressive," he said, then lowered his head and started his rapid engrave work. He flipped through the books at high speed. Densujo, Tarantalegra, Fiendfire, the Erosion Curse. Under his engrave ability, these spells settled into him almost instantly. To Lynn, they were, indeed, just inconsequential tricks. Hermione watched the blur of his hands with growing unease. She leaned forward, peered at the covers, and her face went pale with shock and disapproval. "Lynn, these books," she whispered, lowering her voice. "Why aren't any of these in the regular section? These spells are obscure, and some of them seem from the restricted section," Lynn said without looking up, his fingers still turning pages. "What?" Hermione's whisper stabbed louder than she intended, and several heads turned. "Quiet!" Madame Pince materialized at their table like a shadow, her glare cutting. "Miss Granger, no shouting in the library. One more outburst, and you will be asked to leave." Hermione flushed crimson and hurriedly apologized. When Madame Pince drifted away, Hermione leaned in and hissed, "Studying the dark arts is against school rules. You can't. I have a professor's permission slip." Lynn finally looked up and waved the parchment as casually as if it were a meal ticket. Hermione gaped. She began to argue, but stopped when she saw his calm expression and the genuine slip. She pursed her lips and went back to her volume, though worry and confusion tugged her eyes toward Lynn and his pile of dangerous books. When he closed the final book with a satisfied snap, Lynn glanced out at the sun sliding toward the horizon and cast a time-telling charm. "I'm heading out," he said. It'll be nearly mealtime. Time flies. He stacked the books to return to the restricted section. Hermione faltered at the way he'd addressed her. He offered a lazy half smile. After a pause, she returned the greeting uncertainly. "Goodbye, friend," before curfew in the Hufflepuff dormitory. After a long day, Lynn finally returned to his Hufflepuff four-poster bed. He had spent the afternoon down by the lake and come back dejected, the fish basket empty. He collapsed onto the soft mattress and fumed. Why? Why could Edgar and the others catch something with a casual cast, while I, after careful preparation and patient waiting, can't even catch a single fry? Coming back empty-handed had become a habit, but it didn't make it any less frustrating. As he sulked, Edgar's muffled voice floated over from the opposite bed, excited and low. "Guys, it's a long night. Do you want to go on a night adventure?" "That's not a good idea. It's against school rules." Ollie's hesitant whisper came from the other side of the room, though the rustle of him putting on shoes betrayed his intent. "Wouldn't it be dangerous? We could get caught by Filch or Madame Norris." William, sounding like the most cautious of the group, protested, "That's exactly why we should go early." Edgar was all for it. Late at night is worse, more peeves and more professors on patrol. Now's perfect. The cautious voices were quickly drowned out by excitement. "What about you, Lynn?" "Lynn?" Edgar peered over the edge of his bed. Lynn didn't answer at first, then his voice came from the direction of the door. "Let's go." He'd already thrown on his cloak, wand in hand, converting his earlier sour mood into action. 4 dark shapes slipped quietly out of the Hufflepuff common room, relying on their prior knowledge of the castle to avoid several patrolling suits of armor and a distant meow from Madame Norris. They made it to the castle gates without incident. The Hogwarts grounds at night were silvered by moonlight and quiet in a way that felt full of secrets. "We're out. Where to?" Edgar asked. Lynn took a deep pull of the cool air and felt some of his frustration ease. "The Forbidden Forest," he suggested. Edgar's eyes lit up. "We can wander the castle grounds any day, but the Forbidden Forest is forbidden at all times. That's a proper adventure." "Then what are we waiting for? Go! Go!" Lynn joined in. They crossed the lawn and, to Lynn's surprise, passed a vegetable patch. "Why are there vegetable patches at Hogwarts?" William asked, peering at the moonlit pumpkins and pushing his glasses up. Lynn rubbed his chin, thinking, "Maybe I should apply for a small plot of land myself and grow something. It'd be a waste not to use my bountiful harvest talent. Maybe I could even make money growing rare herbs." The idea seemed worth considering. They reached the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Ancient trees stood thick and close, branches weaving together into a dark wall. Rustling and distant cries came from deep inside. The 4 of them exchanged looks, and by unspoken agreement, decided not to go in far, just to wander the outskirts and soak up the atmosphere. Something rustled in the nearby bushes. "What kind of magical creature is that?" Ollie whispered, pointing. Under the moonlight, a small creature of twigs and bark peered through the leaves. "It's a bowtruckle. I'll go take a look." Lynn couldn't see it clearly, but relying on his affinity talent, he stepped forward. The bowtruckle reached out a twiggy hand and handed him a wand. "Here, I found it," a tiny voice whispered in Lynn's ear. Lynn took the wand. It looked a bit old, but well cared for. Someone unlucky must have dropped it in the forest. "Do you know who dropped it?" Lynn asked the bowtruckle, communicating without thinking. "A red-haired human dropped it," the bowtruckle replied in fits and starts. "Red-haired," Lynn repeated. "No need to think too hard. Weasley, probably." One of the Weasleys was bound to have left their wand while exploring the forest. Edgar's eyes went wide. "Lynn, you can talk to magical creatures?" William and Ollie crowded around, stunned. "Why didn't you tell us?" they all demanded at once, their whispers unexpectedly loud in the quiet night. Lynn blinked and feigned innocence. "Didn't I tell you guys?" he said, then tucked the wand away. Since they had a lost item, the quartet wandered a little deeper into the forest edge, hoping to run into its owner. Along the way, they met more creatures: bowtruckles, fluffy puffskines, and a wary Kneasel that followed them at a distance. Every time they encountered an animal, Edgar peppered Lynn with questions. Lynn translated the bowtruckle's simple greetings, "Hello," and the boys laughed at how polite even the smallest forest creatures seemed. Ollie didn't talk much, but his eyes glittered with envy at Lynn's talent. Then Lynn suddenly stopped, raised a hand for silence, and his expression turned serious. "What is it?" Edgar whispered. "Something's wrong. Very wrong," Lynn muttered. His scalp prickled. The feeling of danger grew sharp. "It might be too late to get out. Quick, find somewhere to hide." The others didn't know why, but they trusted Lynn's unusual solemnity and scattered. They slipped behind thick trunks and into dense bushes, holding their breaths until even their heartbeats sounded loud. They'd been hidden for less than a minute when two figures in black hooded robes stepped out into a moonlit clearing not far away. Their faces were hidden. They didn't look like friendly people. "Merlin, where did those brats run off to?" One short wizard snapped, his voice rough. "I told you not to chatter. You let them get away," the taller wizard hissed, impatient and angry. "And those two clumsy idiots didn't even get the main target tonight, the mooncalf. What rotten luck." Lynn's mind ran through curses. Merlin's lace-trimmed suspenders, of all nights to run into poachers while out for a stroll. The taller wizard's temper burst. Frustrated by their failure, he suddenly raised his wand and fired a spell into the surrounding trees as if to vent. Diffindo, a cutting spell, tore through the air, heading straight for the spot where Lynn crouched under a disillusionment charm. 17. Wo Diao Nime, Protego. At the critical moment, Lynn snapped his wand up. A translucent barrier condensed in front of him in an instant. Diffindo struck the shield charm with a sharp metallic clang. Sparks showered out and the spell fizzled, yet the force still numbed Lynn's arm and sent him stumbling. Worse, he was exposed. "Who's there?" the two dark wizards demanded, spinning toward him with wands leveled. "Torrential impact! Expelliarmus!" they shouted. Lynn acted on reflex, dual-wielding. His own wand in his right hand unleashed a high-pressure jet of water, while the salvaged Weasley wand in his left sent a flash of red, and Expelliarmus. Juggling both wands and his nerves made his aim sloppy, the red bolt careened off into the trees. The water spell, however, had a wide cone. It hit the pudgy dark wizard like a sledgehammer, knocking him flat and drenched on the ground, groaning and momentarily helpless. "Crucio!" The taller wizard spat in fury, not even checking who'd attacked them. The curse hissed toward Lynn. Fear made a local curse tumble out of him. An internal alarm, Peter's jolt, screamed a frantic warning. Instinct and the cold control of 100 skeletons, one heart took over. Lynn rolled aside clumsily, but effectively. The curse shaved the hem of his robes and slammed into a tree behind him. The bark blackened and twisted where the spell struck. A notification popped into his head. "Engrave. Success. Great. Another skill learned." "Run. I'll hold them off. Go get the professors." Lynn shouted toward Edgar and the others. He could apparate away any time, but he had to make sure his friends got to safety first. At Lynn's yell, the two dark wizards reflexively glanced toward the castle lights, revealing their positions. "Looking for your daddy?" "Diffindo! Diffindo!" Lynn seized the opening and flicked both wands again. Calmer now, his cutting charms found their marks. A gash appeared along the tall wizard's arm, and the pudgy one, just getting to his feet, took one squarely in the leg. Both cursed, groaned, and scrambled for cover. Edgar, William, and Ollie didn't hesitate. Seeing the enemies suppressed, they gritted their teeth and ran for the lit path to the castle. From behind a tree, the tall wizard fired back. "Expelliarmus!" The bolt flew crooked from his injury and blind anger. It missed overhead. Lynn had time to mutter in annoyance and then cast the disillusionment charm he'd only recently mastered. His body blurred into the shadows and he vanished from sight. Buy time. Wait for reinforcements, he thought. He wasn't going to get expelled over handling two small fry and risk failing his system missions. "You little brat, where are you hiding? Get out here!" The tall wizard cursed, prowling. "Your daddy is here. Expelliarmus!" Lynn slipped behind him like a ghost. The redirected Expelliarmus whipped the wand from the tall wizard's hand and sent it skittering to the ground. Without hesitating, Lynn fired a stupefy at close range. The wizard's eyes rolled back, and he went limp. Blending back into the dark, Lynn watched the pudgy wizard cower in the grass, trying to go invisible by lowering his breathing and his presence. Two quick, precise spells, Expelliarmus and Stupefy, hit with surgeon-like accuracy. The pudgy wizard didn't even get another scream out before he, too, went out cold. Lynn breathed out and walked over to gather the fallen wands. 3 trophies now. He fashioned a rope with transfiguration and securely bound the 2 unconscious dark wizards. Then, concentrating, he recalled the route and the edge of the forbidden forest. Pop! Apparition cracked, and he vanished from the clearing. He reappeared at the edge of the vegetable patch they'd passed earlier, the night air cool against his skin. Lynn? You were just inside! Edgar and the others blurted as they turned and saw him standing there. Their eyes were wide. They're both knocked out, Lynn said. Let's go. We'll talk back at the dormitory. There was no time to argue. He hurried them along, and they ran all the way to the warmly lit castle entrance without further incident. Before barging through the doors, Lynn casually tossed the salvaged Weasley wand in a conspicuous place near the entrance and kept walking. In the Hufflepuff dormitory, the 4 of them collapsed, out of breath. Edgar grabbed Lynn's arm, trembling but full of admiration. William and Ollie crowded close, disbelief and excitement painted on their faces. How did you do it? Took on 2 dark wizards by yourself? Edgar asked. They weren't strong, Lynn shrugged, pretending nonchalance. They panicked after I hit them, and I found an opening. Awesome. What was that water spell? And how did you dodge that curse? Edgar rattled off questions, too wired to sleep. For them, the night's horror had transformed into the impossible thrill of having a roommate who might secretly be a one-man army. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Fred and George Weasley lay side by side under Madame Pomfrey's watchful eye, Professor McGonagall standing over them with a stern, frozen expression. So, you went into the Forbidden Forest after curfew and ran into 2 unidentified dark wizards? McGonagall's voice was like ice. Yes, Professor, Fred admitted. They looked like they were trying to catch some sort of creature. One of them chattered on and wouldn't shut up. We slipped away while he was distracted. It had been that talkativeness that let the twins escape and run back to the castle, where they happened upon McGonagall on her rounds. After hearing their report, McGonagall saw the seriousness of the situation and sent for Professors Snape and Flitwick to investigate. At the castle entrance, they found a lost wand, dropped and conspicuously placed. In the part of the Forbidden Forest the twins had described, the professors discovered 2 dark wizards, stunned, bound, and stripped of their wands, lying helpless among the trees. The 3 professors exchanged looks. The scene was too thorough to be the work of ordinary students. Whoever had subdued the pair had done it decisively, and not like anyone at Hogwarts. The Great Hall buzzed with gossip. A Gryffindor student was spreading the latest version in an exaggerated voice. Did you hear? Last night, the Weasley twins were caught by Professor McGonagall wandering the Forbidden Forest after hours. They lost 50 points each, and a whole week of detention. What? I heard they ran into dark wizards and barely made it back, someone else said. No, you've all got it wrong, a Hufflepuff protested. A Ravenclaw leaned in and dropped his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. My cousin helps in the infirmary. She said the twins were so badly hurt, Madame Pomfrey couldn't fix them. They're being sent to St. Mungo's. Lynn and his 3 companions at the Hufflepuff table exchanged glances as the rumor mill grew wilder. They observed a moment's silence for the tragic twins. In truth, Fred and George had each been docked 50 points, an awful blow to Gryffindor's House Cup chances, and handed a week of detention. Physically, they were fine, suffering only shock and some superficial injuries. Madame Pomfrey had insisted they stay for at least 24 hours of observation before they were discharged. An old, shabby-looking owl then flew awkwardly into the hall, circling once as if it couldn't find its target. It made a crooked beeline for a red-haired, freckled Gryffindor and dropped a letter beside his bowl. Lynn heard it give a clipped hoot, all the same, before letting the envelope fall. When Ron picked it up and saw the bright red wax, his face went pale and his hands began to tremble. Oh no, it's a howler! Cover your ears! Edgar, who had grown up in the wizarding world and recognized one, shouted and clasped his hands over his ears. Lynn, William, and Ollie did the same, but Edgar's warning came too late. The moment Ron touched the envelope, it exploded. A thunderous, furious female voice filled the great hall. Fred, George, you 2 little rascals, how dare you sneak into the Forbidden Forest so late at night? Do you know your father and I nearly had heart attacks when Professor McGonagall wrote to us? If Headmaster Dumbledore hadn't told us you were safe, I would have stormed up here myself. Just wait. You're in for a terrible summer. And Ron, if you follow your brother's example. The howler went on for a full minute. Ron shrank into his seat, wishing the tables had holes to crawl into. The entire hall fell silent, except for the echo of Mrs. Weasley's outrage. Lynn glanced sympathetically at Ron and at the crimson-faced redheads at the Gryffindor table who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. After that colorful lunch, Lynn slipped away by himself to the third greenhouse. It was Sunday afternoon. He found Professor Sprout tending a mandrake and greeted her politely. "Good afternoon, Professor." "Hello, Lynn," she replied with her warm, sun-like smile. "Do you need something?" "A question about herbology?" Lynn shifted a little. "Well, Professor, is that vegetable patch by the castle, near the lawn, privately owned? I saw pumpkins and other things growing there. I'd like to clear a small plot nearby and grow some plants of my own." Professor Sprout wiped her brow with dirt-streaked gloves and thought a moment. "That patch is looked after by Rubus Hagrid. It's Hogwarts land, used to grow vegetables and herbs for the kitchens. If you'd like to cultivate a small experimental plot, that's a splendid idea, but you'll need Headmaster Dumbledore's permission. He generally approves of students pursuing extracurricular interests." Lynn's gaze drifted to a nearby seedbed, and he felt his heart lift. The Hogwarts white flower he'd planted not long ago was thriving, lush, several stalks already ready for harvest. The effect of his bountiful harvest talent was impressively fast. "Professor, could I harvest some of the Hogwarts white flower I planted?" he asked, pointing. "Of course. Those are the fruits of your labor," Sprout said. She bent down to examine the plants and murmured, pleasantly surprised, "Remarkable. They've matured far faster than I expected, and the quality is excellent. You've taken very good care of them, Lynn." Lynn laughed nervously, quickly gathered the best blooms, and stuffed them into his bag. Professor Sprout then told him the general location and the password for the headmaster's office. With a bag of Hogwarts and a flutter of nerves, Lynn walked to the 8th floor and the huge stone gargoyle. He pronounced the password clearly. "Lemon sherbet." The gargoyle sprang to life and hopped aside, revealing the slow-turning spiral staircase. The password seemed oddly sweet for the entrance to the headmaster's office, Lynn thought as he climbed. At the shimmering oak door he knocked. "Come in," Dumbledore's gentle voice answered. Lynn pushed the door open and halted in the doorway. The headmaster's office was unexpectedly full. Dumbledore sat behind his desk. A bird dozed on a gilded perch. Near them stood a middle-aged man in a striped suit, somewhat portly and balding, and 4 aurors with serious, hard faces. 2 men, bound tight with enchanted ropes and with their mouths gagged, sat mute and helpless. They were the same dark wizards from the Forbidden Forest. Lynn's stomach dropped. Bad timing, he thought. Was this an interrogation? A handover of prisoners? The portly man rose and, with a professional smile, said to Dumbledore, "We won't keep you any longer, sir. Thank you for your assistance. We'll take these 2 back for questioning." He signaled the aurors, who hoisted the limp prisoners as if lifting sacks and carried them out. As he passed Lynn, the man nodded affably. A faint magical aura showed the prisoners had been securely subdued. When the room returned to quiet, Dumbledore's blue eyes crinkled behind his half-moon spectacles as he gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Now is the perfect time, Mr. Lynn. Please sit. What can I do for you? Would you like something to drink? I have honey water, brown sugar water, or a cup of hot cocoa." As he spoke, he stroked his long beard. The place Lynn had once plucked at it seemed to throb faintly. This young wizard certainly had a strong grip, Dumbledore thought amusedly. Lynn settled into the soft chair and put on his most obedient expression. "Warm water would be fine. Thank you, Headmaster. I came to ask permission to cultivate a small plot of land near Hagrid's vegetable patch. I'd like to plant a few things." "I agree." Dumbledore agreed to Lynn's request almost without thinking. His attention, oddly enough, seemed to be fixed on the cup of steaming, absurdly sweet black tea in front of him. Syrup would have been a better word. With a small spoon, he scooped a bit of the liquid and held it toward the large, somewhat listless red bird perched nearby. To the headmaster, a polite, nature-loving Hufflepuff, asking for a little patch of castle grounds to grow flowers and grass was the most reasonable of requests, exactly the sort of thing Hogwarts should encourage. How could he refuse? Lynn was still bubbling with relief and about to thank him when a system chime popped into his head at the worst possible moment. Ding! Mission issued. Please speak up for the suffering phoenix in front of you and protest against Headmaster Dumbledore's atrocity. Reward: an egg. Note: guess what's inside? No prize even if you guess right. Lynn's eyes flicked to the phoenix. Fox, though phoenix made him think of a grand, sacred bird, looked more like a sulky, oversized red bird whose feathers were a little ruffled and whose golden eyes burned with pure disdain. When the spoon approached, Fox turned his head and gave a sharp, indignant cry. Lynn's language mastery translated the sound instantly. He watched Dumbledore, who still wore a benign, indulgent expression, insist on feeding the bird. He looked at Fox, who seemed to be screaming help with every feather, and swallowed. Professor. Dumbledore looked up, curious and gentle. Yes, Mr. Lynn? Your phoenix is telling you to stop, Lynn said as tactfully as he could. Stop? Dumbledore blinked, genuinely puzzled, his eyes moving from the spoon to Fox. Lynn's mind ran hot. Isn't it obvious? The message said. Don't touch. Then Fox seemed to realize the boy could understand him. His gemstone eyes flashed, and a clear thought came across in perfect, indignant prose. Hello, little wizard who can understand me. I am Fox. Hello, Fox, I'm Lynn, he answered automatically. Dumbledore's interest sharpened. Communicating with magical creatures wasn't common, but it wasn't unheard of. He leaned forward, clearly pleased and eager. Oh, do tell me, what does Fox think of my afternoon tea? Lynn hesitated. The bird's next thoughts were spicy. Fox's irritation crackled through. Tell this stubborn old man, if he dares to bring that cup of cloying, what passes as tea, near my beak again, I will. Dumbledore smiled expectantly. Would you like the original words, Mr. Lynn? Lynn sighed inwardly, and steeling himself, translated in a flat, scholarly tone as if reciting from a textbook. Old man, if you don't stop feeding me that sickly sweet stuff that's basically poisonous, I'll... He sped through the uncouth remainder with a blush at having to mouth it. In your robes, troll's snot. Shove it in your mouth. Spee. The last bits were garbled, but the meaning was clear enough. Lynn finished and bolted toward the door as fast as his feet would carry him. Thank you, Principal, for approving my vegetable plot. Goodbye, Professor. Goodbye, Fox. He was gone before the echo of his footsteps faded. Ding! Mission complete. Reward, mysterious pet egg has been issued to system space. Left alone, Dumbledore stood motionless, the spoon suspended midair. His expression was a baffled mix of amusement, shock, and the faintest touch of guilt. Fox lifted his head and gave a clear, triumphant cry. Dumbledore glanced from the smug bird to the cup he had just been told was comparable to poison, then gave a helpless laugh and, with a small shake of his head, sent the spoon's contents into his own mouth. Lynn, egg quietly deposited in his system space, walked out of the castle in a buoyant mood. Next stop, Rubus Hagrid. If he wanted to break ground near someone's territory, courtesy demanded he say hello. Crossing the lawn, already dusted with the first hints of yellowing, he spotted the little wooden hut at the edge of the forbidden forest. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something faintly singed. Outside the hut, a rough yard was enclosed by a low fence. Crossbows and what looked like sturdy umbrellas, probably used as battering rams, leaned casually against the wall. As Lynn reached the fence, a deep, booming voice drifted from inside the hut. Several curious Jarvies peered out from beneath the window. Under a nearby tree, a serious-looking cat-like creature was licking its paws, its sharp eyes fixed on the newcomer. Lynn's affinity talent registered nothing hostile, only plain curiosity. He could almost hear the Jarvies' puzzled chatter. Another biped? And the cat-like thing, cool and appraising. Doesn't smell annoying. He took a breath and raised his hand to knock on the thick wooden door. Let's go. To exercise. Let's go to exercise. Knock, knock, knock! The dull thud of the heavy wooden door brought the lively conversation inside to an abrupt halt. Coming, a rough voice called, followed by heavy footsteps. The door creaked open, and Hagrid's massive figure filled the doorway. He peered down at the unfamiliar young person standing there, puzzled. Hello, Hagrid. My name's Lynn, the student said politely. I'm a first year in Hufflepuff. I just applied to Headmaster Dumbledore for a plot of land, and I'm planning to grow some things next to the vegetable patch you look after. I came specifically to see you." At that, Hagrid's coppery eyes lit up with enthusiasm. To him, children who liked the outdoors and cared about the land were automatically good kids. "Oh, please come in. Please come in. It's windy out." Hagrid stepped aside with a warm smile and ushered Lynn into the hut, then bustled toward the fireplace. "Have a seat first. I'll get some drinks and the cakes I just baked." Lynn stepped into the warm little room. The first things he noticed were the roaring fire and the hams and herbs hanging from the rafters. "Lynn?" a slightly surprised female voice called. He turned and saw there were 3 other people in the room. Hermione Granger was rising from a large wooden bench, clearly surprised. "Hermione, what a coincidence running into you here," Lynn said, equally surprised, and smiled. Beside Hermione sat 2 boys. One had bright red hair and freckles, obviously a Weasley. The other was thin and small, wearing round glasses and a faint lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. Lynn thought he looked familiar. Edgar had mentioned a famous Gryffindor before, but the name had slipped his mind. The boy with glasses stood and reached out his hand, shy but friendly. "Hello, I'm Harry Potter." "Hello, I'm Ron Weasley." The red-haired boy rose as well and gave Lynn a curious once-over. "I'm Lynn, Hufflepuff, first year." Lynn shook hands with them both, and his thoughts caught up to his surroundings. Harry Potter, the boy who lived. "How do you 2 know each other?" Ron asked, bouncing with curiosity. He found it hard to imagine Hermione being friends with a Hufflepuff. "We met in the library twice," Hermione explained. "Lynn reads very fast. We've talked a few times." Hagrid returned then, carrying a massive tray piled with mugs and a plate of rock-hard biscuits. "Come on, try some of my rock cakes. Best with tea." He thrust a mug and a rock cake into Lynn's hands. Lynn thanked him, took in the brick-like cake, braced himself, and decided to bite like a hero facing a grim fate. Crack. The sound was sharp as stone breaking. Lynn felt his teeth hit something that might as well have been rock. His gums went numb from the jolt. Crumbs scattered like sand across his tongue. The taste was substantial, if not refined. He forced a polite smile, placed the cake, now marked with a single tooth impression, back on the plate, and drank several mouthfuls of hot tea to wash the sandy feeling away. He noticed the plates in front of Harry and Ron were mostly untouched as well. Only Hermione nibbled slowly at the edge, her expression difficult to read. After chatting with Hagrid for a while, Lynn stood to take his leave. He headed back toward the Hufflepuff common room, already calculating how many hands he'd need to clear and cultivate the vegetable patch. How could he not get his housemates involved? In the common room, William was curled in the most comfortable armchair by the fire, absorbed in a book called History of the Evolution of Magic Theory. Lynn nudged him. "Want to come?" William gave a look that said, "Are you serious? If you don't tell me where we're going, why would I come? Back to Black Lake to feed mosquitoes. Exercise," Lynn tried, bluffing. "Fresh air, good for you." William pushed his glasses up and blinked as if the sun had risen in the west. "You exercising? Speak human." He failed to keep up the pretense. "I want to farm. I got a plot approved. What would you like me to grow?" "Strawberries," Edgar called, having sat up at the mention of food. He was already excited. "Sweet and juicy," Edgar added before William could answer. "Then plant some and come help. Fruit always tastes better when you grow it yourself." Lynn looked at William and at Ollie, who had just come in from outside. Ollie said nothing but nodded. Faced with 3 expectant faces, William closed his book with a sigh. Fine. Let's call it extracurricular practice." And so the Hufflepuff quartet set off for the uncultivated vegetable patch just outside the castle. They arrived at a neglected corner beside Hagrid's giant pumpkin patch. Lynn rolled up his sleeves and started the work. "First, clear the site. Incendio." He raised his wand. The dead grass and debris caught light and burned away, leaving blackened earth and the sharp scent of charred wood. From that tree to that rock. That should be enough," he said, measuring the space. "If it's too big, we won't be able to manage it, just enough to feed us." He picked up a thick, sturdy branch from the ground and weighed it in his hand. "What's that for?" Edgar asked, curious. "Watch, turning waste into treasure and practicing a bit of transfiguration," Lynn said with a mysterious smile. He pointed his wand at the branch. Vera Verto. Under the 4 pairs of eyes, the ordinary branch elongated and transformed. In an instant, it became a practical-looking plow. What's that? Edgar circled the odd contraption. Farming equipment, Lynn said, as if it were obvious, patting the plow. And a chance to practice transfiguration and the levitation charm. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. They all looked at him doubtfully. Operate it like this. Lynn pushed the front of the magically altered plow into the soil at one end of the plot, then walked to the other end. He pointed his wand at the plow and called, Wingardium Leviosa! The plow rose obediently, summoned toward him. As it moved, the blade sliced through the earth, neatly turning the dark, moist soil and creating a straight, deep furrow. Lynn sheathed his wand with a small, satisfied smile and pointed at the neat row. Using the levitation charm to control a tool for tilling saves effort and lets you practice precise wand control and regulation of magical power. Convenient, isn't it? The 3 boys looked at the tidy furrow and then at Lynn's easy manner. Their eyes brightened and they all nodded in unison.